King Charles entered the morning, expecting a difficult legal ruling. He did not expect to hear his late father's words read aloud, or discover that Camilla had apparently known about them before he did. When the court opened a sealed document bearing Prince Philip's signature, the atmosphere changed instantly. One paragraph restricted Camilla from touching some of Philip's most private royal affairs. Then came the revelation that stunned Charles even more. The decree had been hidden. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles stared at the pages as the judge continued. The court, the legal forum deciding how Philip's private papers would be handled, had unsealed a decree, meaning a formal written instruction carrying his wishes. It was specific. Camilla could not review, remove, direct, suppress, or control his private correspondence, family memoranda, or memorial instructions. Those papers held personal judgments, family exchanges, and final wishes never meant to become tools of influence. Camilla remained still as another clause landed. Any attempt by her to influence those materials had to be disclosed to Charles and William, placing responsibility beyond her reach. As king, the reigning sovereign, Charles carried authority, yet his father had bound him to a safeguard. Philip's title of prince marked senior royal status, but these words were personal. Charles removed his glasses, set them down, and looked toward his wife. The possibility, she knew, hurt more than the restriction. Camilla tightened her fingers around a pen as the judge asked why the decree was absent from the palace archive inventory. An archive inventory is the official record showing what documents are held, where stored, and who controls them. Charles noticed the movement. Tiny as it was, it felt louder than denial. Court records exposed the detail that changed everything. A copy of Philip's decree had reached Camilla's office during cataloging after 2021, yet it never appeared on the principal index presented to Charles. A handwritten routing notation sent the document into a restricted file instead of the normal archive sequence. Beside it sat initials linked directly to Camilla's household. Charles felt one question closing around him. His father had not merely excluded Camilla, he had anticipated someone might influence what survived him. The monarch knew the prohibition, and the document had been diverted. What he still did not know was why Philip considered that safeguard necessary. That answer would drag Charles beyond the courtroom and into an older confrontation the family tried to bury. Before he could decide whether he felt betrayed, furious, or humiliated, he had to understand what Philip feared, and what Camilla once asked him to do. The decree may have carried Philip's signature, but its consequences landed on 3 living people. Charles saw a secret kept inside his own marriage. Camilla saw a dead man's distrust return to judge her publicly. William saw evidence that his grandfather had anticipated a struggle no one else understood. Suddenly, this was no longer a dispute about old papers. It was about loyalty, between husband and wife, father and son, and one generation of royals against another. Charles felt the weight. As king, the reigning sovereign responsible for honoring royal instructions, he could not dismiss what his father had written. Yet as Camilla's husband, he was staring at evidence, suggesting she had withheld something Philip specifically ordered him to know. That distinction cut deep. The document had entered his marriage. William carried a different burden. The decree named him beside Charles, as one of the people who had to be informed if anyone tried to influence Philip's protected papers. The Prince of Wales, the title held by the heir next in line to the throne, was no longer watching from the edge. His grandfather had deliberately placed him inside the safeguard. Charles stood in a quiet side room when William finally asked the question neither man wanted to hear aloud. Had he ever seen the decree before? The king kept his eyes fixed ahead. Never once. William said nothing. He heard the humiliation beneath those words, and he understood that his father was fighting to remain calm, because anger would make every next decision harder. Camilla reacted differently. She sat with one advisor and demanded to know how the restricted file had reached the court. Her voice was sharp at first. Then Philip's distrust began to settle over her. What had once existed privately between them was now shaping how Charles viewed her honesty. She asked whether the king had requested to speak with her. He had not. William remembered something then. Philip had often insisted that personal correspondence was not crown property, meaning it did not automatically belong to the institution simply because a royal had written it. At the time, those remarks sounded like an older man protecting his privacy. Now they felt like preparation. Charles received another sheet before leaving. The archive transfer record carried Camilla's office stamp. He did not accuse her. Instead, he folded the page once and asked for the chain of custody, the documented trail showing who handled the file and when. That trail pointed backward. It led to one private meeting at Windsor, one request from Camilla, and one moment when Philip's suspicion hardened into action. To understand the decree, Charles would have to return to the conversation that changed everything. Every explosive document has a moment before the ink dries. A moment when suspicion becomes decision. For Philip, that moment came during a private Windsor discussion years before his death. Camilla had arrived expecting an ordinary conversation about preserving royal correspondence. Instead, one request stopped him cold. Witnesses would later remember his expression changing almost instantly. He did not shout. He did something far more consequential. Within days, Philip summoned his solicitor and began drafting the decree, now tearing through the family. Philip had always guarded one boundary fiercely. His private letters were not the same as official royal records. The wider royal archive, the organized collection preserving documents connected to the monarchy, could contain institutional material, but he regarded family letters, personal judgments, memorial wishes, and private instructions as his own voice. To him, those words belonged to the people he chose, not to whoever later controlled the household around them. Camilla had moved closer to those questions as her role expanded. By February 2020, she was increasingly involved in discussions about commemorations, household access, and how older members of the family might eventually be remembered. During a private meeting at Windsor Castle, she asked whether her office could help review sensitive family correspondence after Philip's death before it reached Charles or the wider archive. She argued that painful misunderstandings could be prevented before they hardened into permanent damage. Philip changed immediately. According to a fictional documented account later attached to the legal file, he answered with icy precision, "My words do not require protecting from my family." Camilla tried to explain that she meant orderly handling, not censorship. He did not accept the distinction. He pushed his chair back, ended the meeting, and left her with no chance to reshape what he believed he had just heard. Within 48 hours, Philip called for his private solicitor and secretary. A solicitor is a lawyer who prepares legal documents and advises clients on their rights and instructions. He dictated the central restriction himself. Camilla must never hold unilateral authority over his personal correspondence, and any attempt to influence its treatment had to be disclosed directly to Charles and William. Philip went further. He ordered 2 authenticated copies, meaning verified duplicates, treated as genuine, to be stored separately. One remained with his legal papers. Another entered a restricted family archive. The arrangement made accidental disappearance difficult. Yet after his death, one copy became strangely hard to trace. Its route moved through the office of the very woman he had excluded. The past had supplied motive. The court had supplied evidence. Now Charles and Camilla were heading toward a confrontation neither could avoid. And this time, silence could protect nobody. Charles waited until the court adjourned. No cameras, no ceremonial smiles, no aides standing close enough to interrupt. Inside a private consultation room, he placed Philip's decree on the table between himself and Camilla and asked one question. "When did you know?" She tried to answer carefully. He stopped her. For perhaps the first time since the ruling began, the king was no longer speaking as monarch. He was speaking as a husband who believed something fundamental had been withheld. Charles already knew her office had received the document during the cataloging of Philip's estate material. That process meant sorting, recording, and assigning sensitive papers after his death so they could be handled correctly. What remained uncertain was far more personal. Had Camilla herself ordered the decree into restricted handling, or had routine legal procedure created the appearance of concealment? She insisted sensitive papers were often separated for review. He listened, but his face gave nothing away. Camilla leaned toward the document and tried to explain that restriction did not mean destruction. Charles slid the routing sheet across the table instead. His finger stopped beside the handwritten instruction and the authorization tied to her office. She began talking about procedural safeguards, about sensitive material being held until legal questions were resolved. He cut through it with 6 words. "My father said I was to be told." Camilla faltered. She finally admitted she had known Philip restricted her access. The Queen Consort, the title used for the wife of a reigning king, said the wording had terrified her because it seemed to confirm years of distrust she had tried to leave behind. She feared Charles would read it and believe his father had never truly accepted her. Her voice weakened as she admitted wanting time before telling him. Charles did not raise his voice. That made the question worse. Did time mean days, months, indefinitely? Camilla opened her mouth, then stopped. She could not give him a clear answer. The silence between them became heavier than any accusation. He had asked for truth. She had given him enough of it to deepen the wound. William arrived only after the private exchange ended. He saw Charles emerge alone, and immediately understood something had changed. The prince watched his father pause before speaking, and the king told him only that the matter was now more complicated than the court knows. But Philip had anticipated complication. Charles still controlled what happened inside his marriage. The decree controlled something else. Hidden inside its final provisions was a safeguard stating that proven concealment would automatically remove authority from the household responsible. And that meant power was about to move. Philip had anticipated resistance. That was the most unsettling discovery of all. Buried beneath the prohibition was a safeguard designed to activate if anyone tried to bypass his wishes. It required no palace negotiation and no private compromise. Once concealment was established, authority over the protected papers moved automatically to independent trustees working alongside Charles and William. Camilla was not merely reprimanded by the decree, she was removed from the process entirely, and Philip had arranged it years before anyone knew it would matter. Charles received the ruling from his legal advisor with the same folder still nearby. The safeguard created a 3-part oversight structure, meaning responsibility would now be shared between an independent legal trustee, the king as Philip's son, and William as the next generation named in the document. That mattered because no single household could quietly control the archive again. The system had been built to prevent exactly that. Charles rubbed his forehead and asked the question everyone around him expected. Could he soften it? Could the monarch allow Camilla some limited role without violating the decree? His advisor answered carefully but firmly, not without ignoring Philip's explicit instruction. For Charles, that answer carried a private cruelty. He could forgive inside his marriage if he chose. He could not rewrite his father's boundary simply because it had become painful. William reacted without satisfaction. When told he would share oversight, the prince said quietly that he wished his grandfather had never believed such protection was necessary. His sadness changed the mood. This was not a victory over Camilla. It was proof that Philip had expected a conflict serious enough to design protection against it. The trustees moved quickly. A trustee is a person legally responsible for protecting and managing material according to someone else's instructions. They confirmed that Camilla's household could no longer handle Philip's protected correspondence while the transfer was completed. The sealed archive included personal memoranda written after major family disputes, private exchanges involving William and Harry, and detailed directions about how Philip wanted his legacy treated after his death. Then one title stopped Charles cold: Continuity After Me. The memorandum was listed among Philip's most sensitive papers. Charles read the entry twice. The king learned that Camilla's office had marked that exact file for secondary review before the decree was discovered. She had already been forbidden from controlling his papers, yet her household had shown unusual interest in the document dealing with what came after him. William saw his father's expression change. Neither man needed to say what the discovery suggested. The safeguard had now stripped away control, but it could not erase the choices already made. And within hours, those choices would stop being legal abstractions and begin tearing through the private lives behind palace doors. By evening, the legal language had disappeared beneath something far more painful. Charles returned home, carrying the knowledge that his father distrusted Camilla enough to protect his final papers from her, and that she had known. Across the residence, doors closed softly, and conversations stopped when footsteps approached. Camilla was no longer fighting a document. She was facing a husband who could not decide whether her silence had been fear, calculation, or both. And William was about to make the fallout even more personal. Camilla's staff received formal instructions before nightfall. Access credentials connected to Philip's restricted archive had to be surrendered, and every document that had passed through her office would be logged again under independent supervision. That supervision meant outside legal oversight, designed to make sure the papers were handled according to his written wishes. The order mattered because control had now physically moved away from her household. What had started as suspicion was becoming consequence. Charles made his own decision quietly. He postponed a private engagement rather than appear beside Camilla while still uncertain what he believed. The king understood what that choice would signal inside the household. This was no longer a technical disagreement about records. His marriage had entered the crisis, and everyone close enough to notice the silence knew it. Camilla sat alone after her senior aide left. She removed a bracelet, placed it beside an untouched cup of tea, and asked whether Charles had sent any message. The queen consort received only one answer: no. Her anger faded almost immediately. What replaced it was fear, because his silence meant he was no longer reacting in the moment. He was thinking. William arrived later and found his father still carrying that silence. The prince told Charles that whatever happened next could not be dismissed as an administrative misunderstanding. The king reacted sharply, telling his son that he did not understand everything inside the marriage he was judging. William held his ground. He said Philip's concern had never been simple dislike. It had been control. Charles listened as his son pointed back to the mandatory disclosure clause, the part of the decree requiring any attempted interference to be reported directly. William believed his grandfather feared information could be filtered before reaching the people meant to receive it. The argument landed hard because it matched exactly what had happened. Then the worst suspicion weakened. Charles received confirmation through the trustees' written review that continuity after me remained sealed, intact, and unaltered. Philip's words had not been destroyed or rewritten. That changed everything. Concealment was still real. Destruction was not. For the first time, Charles saw a narrow path between betrayal and something more complicated. But finding it would require one thing the palace had not yet allowed: a conversation with Camilla, without lawyers, courtiers, or William standing between them. The turning point did not happen in court. It happened behind a closed door, with no lawyers, no private secretaries, and no royal titles to hide behind. Charles entered carrying nothing. Camilla was already waiting. For several seconds neither spoke. Then she admitted the sentence he had needed to hear since the decree surfaced. She had known the restriction existed, and she had chosen not to tell him. But what followed changed the meaning of that decision, and changed Charles's response with it. Charles had asked for the meeting without aides because he was finished listening to competing legal interpretations. He wanted her account from beginning to end. A private secretary is a senior aide who helps organize royal duties and official communication, but none were present now. The king wanted no buffer. Camilla told him that after Philip's death, the decree reached her during an archive review, and she immediately recognized the language from their bitter Windsor exchange. Camilla finally admitted the part she had resisted saying plainly. She had instructed an aide to move the decree into restricted correspondence, while she decided how to approach Charles. The queen consort said she feared giving him the document during his grief would force him into an impossible emotional choice between his late father and his wife. She told herself delay was protection. Hearing the words aloud, Even she seemed to understand how dangerous that reasoning had become. Charles answered quietly. That made the moment harder. He told her Philip's distrust would have hurt, but he could have faced it. What wounded him more was discovering that she had decided what truth he was strong enough to receive. The monarch said her silence had made him question something deeper than loyalty. It made him question whether she trusted him at all. Camilla then produced the one piece of evidence that shifted the conversation. She gave Charles a private written note, created when the decree entered her office. The note instructed staff that Philip's document must not be destroyed, amended, or permanently removed. It was to be held only until she decided how to discuss it with him. The paper did not erase concealment, but it weakened the darkest suspicion that she had planned to erase his father's wishes. Charles read it twice. He did not forgive the decision simply because its motive looked less sinister. Instead, the king drew a boundary. Camilla would permanently relinquish involvement with Philip's private archive, and every restriction in the decree would be honored publicly. Camilla accepted it. Their marriage survived the room, but the crisis had already escaped it. Outside the palace, millions were forming judgments from the facts alone, and the next verdict would not be private. By sunrise, Philip's private decree was no longer private in any meaningful sense. The argument had escaped courtrooms and palace corridors and entered breakfast tables, radio studios, and crowds outside royal gates. Some saw Camilla's silence as an unforgivable betrayal. Others saw a frightened attempt to delay a painful family confrontation. But one image dominated everything: Charles sitting motionless as his father's prohibition was read aloud. It turned legal history into something unmistakably human. Britain woke to two facts that no longer seemed possible to soften. Philip had explicitly excluded Camilla from authority over his private archive, and she had knowingly delayed telling Charles about that restriction. Buckingham Palace responded with a short statement, confirming that his wishes would be honored and independent oversight would continue. Independent oversight meant Philip's protected papers would be supervised outside Camilla's household, preventing one office from controlling how his final instructions were handled. Charles refused to let the statement become an attack on his wife. The king told William that acknowledging wrongdoing did not require humiliating Camilla publicly. The prince agreed that Philip's decree had to be respected, but he warned his father against making the wording so gentle that the real breach disappeared. Their disagreement stayed controlled. Both men wanted truth. They simply disagreed over how much pain truth should cause. Camilla read the final version before release. The Queen Consort reached the sentence, "His Royal Highness's expressed wishes will govern without exception." That title referred to Philip's senior royal status, and the formal respect attached to his position. She paused there. Then she nodded once, and handed the page back. No protest followed. For the first time, she was publicly accepting the very boundary she had privately tried to delay. Outside Buckingham Palace, the reaction became impossible to ignore. Crowds gathered beneath newspaper boards carrying the fictional front-page headline, "Philip's Last Barrier." One photograph showed Charles leaving court with Camilla several steps behind him. The image spread because it captured what paragraphs could not. A marriage still intact, but suddenly carrying visible distance. A major television bulletin framed the crisis differently. It called the dispute less a constitutional emergency than a test of whether royal families could survive the same forces that damage ordinary ones: grief, fear, secrecy, and divided loyalty. Charles listened as public anger slowly turned into reflection. The world had already delivered its judgment loudly. Now he had to deliver his quietly. His final decision would determine whether Camilla's concealment defined her future beside him, or became the mistake after which the monarchy drew a permanent line. The final verdict did not destroy a marriage, topple a queen, or fracture the succession. It did something more lasting. It established a boundary that even the king refused to cross. Charles accepted that Camilla had concealed Philip's decree out of fear and self-protection. But he also accepted that fear could not excuse overriding the wishes of a dead man who had deliberately protected his private voice. Philip had written the rule. His family, painfully and publicly, would now live by it. Charles formally confirmed that Philip's restricted correspondence would remain under the independent structure written into the decree. Independent oversight meant the protected papers would be managed under neutral legal supervision, with the king and William involved only within the authority Philip had granted them. That mattered because the crisis had begun with one office controlling information. It would end with no single household able to do that again. Camilla made her own final concession. The queen consort permanently withdrew from decisions involving Philip's private papers, memorial instructions, and protected correspondence. She understood this was not a temporary punishment designed to embarrass her. It was the fulfillment of his explicit wishes. Charles told her privately that he could forgive why she had been afraid, but he could not pretend her silence had been acceptable. She accepted the distinction without argument. William entered his father's room, expecting one more difficult exchange. The prince had spent days defending Philip's restrictions, and he knew Charles had sometimes heard that defense as judgment. Instead, the king looked at him and said, "Your grandfather made his choice. We respect it." William quietly agreed. Neither man had won. More importantly, neither needed to. Then the sealed memorandum finally answered the question hanging over everything. Continuity after me was reviewed under Philip's own rules. The memorandum, a private written statement preserving his thoughts for those who came after him, contained no hidden attack on Camilla, and no secret succession bombshell. Its message was simpler. The monarchy survived only when personal loyalty never became permission to rewrite another person's wishes. Charles understood exactly what that meant. Philip's decree had never truly been about revenge. It had been about ownership of his own voice. Camilla's mistake was believing delay could protect the family, when secrecy nearly destroyed the trust she hoped to preserve. The crisis ended with a boundary intact. Charles emerged changed, not defeated. Camilla remained beside him, but outside Philip's archive. William inherited responsibility, not victory. Love had allowed forgiveness. Duty had kept the line exactly where Philip drew it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.